Today, we're going to deconstruct a really compelling argument, the idea that science isn't a natural mode of human thought at all. Instead, it's a powerful but psychologically very difficult cultural achievement. Our focus is going to be on one single fundamental question. Why is the scientific method, with its core principle of falsification, so profoundly counterintuitive to the human mind?
The paper frames its entire inquiry around what it calls the evolutionary paradox of scientific skepticism. And it really is a paradox when you think about it. Natural selection should logically reward quick, decisive action, not methodical self-doubt. So the central problem we need to tackle is explaining how a cognitive tool like science, which is fundamentally based on doubt, could ever emerge and stick around in a species that seems to be wired for certainty.
Now, to resolve this paradox, the paper introduces a core metaphor that's going to guide our entire analysis. It suggests that the human mind operates on two conflicting systems. First, there's a base-level evolutionary bias. Think of it like firmware that's been optimized over millennia for survival. And then there's a scientific OS, software for skepticism, culturally installed right on top of it.
So here's the syllabus for our analysis. We're going to systematically examine the paper's central arguments. We'll focus on the specific mechanisms that the scientific process uses to co-opt and really redirect our innate cognitive machinery to produce something like objective knowledge.
Okay, let's begin with the first section. This is where we establish the fundamental conflict between our hardwired cognitive programming and the pretty unusual demands of scientific inquiry.
The paper argues that our mental hardware, this cognitive BIOS, defaults to settings that prioritize survival above all else. This includes routines that are designed to reduce doubt, to dismiss contradictory evidence, and to protect our existing beliefs. Now, it's crucial to understand these aren't bugs, they are features. They were highly adaptive in our ancestral environment. Science, however, asks us to run a program that treats these very features as errors that need to be corrected.
So now we turn to the first mechanism. Given that our cognition is biased to avoid contradiction, how on earth does science compel us to confront it? The paper's argument here is that science achieves this through what we can call institutionalized dissonance, a set of powerful structural pressures. First, we have to understand what cognitive dissonance really is. It isn't just a term of phrase, it's a measurable state of physiological stress. You see, when a belief you cherish is challenged by evidence, your brain activates regions that are associated with physical pain and threat. The natural, bias-driven response is to eliminate that pain by just dismissing the evidence. So this slide illustrates how scientific institutions create what the paper calls an epistemic gauntlet. This system is clever because it doesn't rely on individual willpower to overcome that pain. Instead, it externalizes the entire process of critique through a series of, well, escalating ordeals. These institutional structures are designed to make abandoning a flawed theory, over time, the path of least psychological resistance.
We're now going to unpack one of the paper's most significant arguments, that science requires a complete reversal of our biological programming for managing errors. This really gets to the core of our cognitive architecture.
The logic here starts with something called error management theory. The core idea is actually pretty simple. If you have two potential errors you can make, and one is far more costly than the other, natural selection will build a brain that is biased toward making the cheaper error, even if that error happens more often.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the complete inversion it reveals. Our evolutionary bias is built on a better safe than sorry logic. Think about it. The cost of missing a tiger in the grass, a false negative, is death. The cost of seeing a tiger that isn't there, a false positive, is just some wasted energy. So naturally, we evolved to see patterns everywhere. But science? Science demands the exact opposite. It operates on a better ignorant than wrong logic. The cost of accepting a false theory is enormous. It pollutes the entire knowledge base. The cost of missing a true one? Well, that's just a delay in discovery. And that's why science defaults to skepticism.
Next, we're going to explore a specific cognitive vulnerability. The paper argues that our aesthetic sense, the very thing that helps us recognize patterns, can, in the abstract world of science, become a pretty significant roadblock.
This quote from the physicist Paul Dirac just perfectly captures this cognitive preference. The paper argues that our appreciation for symmetry and elegance isn't something we learn, it's an evolutionary artifact. We are literally rewarded with a little dopamine hit for finding patterns that, in our ancestral past, might have signaled a healthy mate or a reliable food source.
So the paper models this as getting stuck on a local peak of an epistemic fitness landscape. Imagine a beautiful but flawed theory as a comfortable hilltop. Any small change you make to it makes it less elegant, so we resist moving. But a truer, better theory might lie on a much higher peak, one that's only accessible if you're willing to first cross a valley of ugly, less coherent ideas. All right, let's move to a computational model that synthesizes a lot of these ideas. This model frames scientific progress not as the product of some lone genius, but as an emergent property of a system that is constantly in conflict.
The paper compares the scientific process to a generative adversarial network, or GAN, which is a type of AI. And again, you have a generator network that creates fake images and a discriminator network that tries to tell them apart from real ones. In science, the creative theorist is the generator, producing new hypotheses. The institutional structure, peer review, replication methodology, that's the discriminator, and its sole job is to destroy false theory.
So the crucial point is this: knowledge isn't simply created out of thin air. It's what's left standing after this rigorous adversarial process. Progress is an emergent property of the friction between unconstrained theory generation and systematic, institutionalized falsification.
Having examined these core mechanisms, we can now conclude with the paper's rather sober final argument about the nature and the stability of scientific reason itself.
The paper argues that science isn't some natural human trait, but a fragile cultural scaffolding that we've built on top of our cognitive bios. It doesn't just run on its own. It requires constant active maintenance. That maintenance happens through institutional design, educational reinforcement, and even the cultural stories we tell about science. Without this scaffolding, we just revert to our default settings.
And this analysis, therefore, leaves us with a final, provocative thought. If the rigorous, self-correcting skepticism of science is indeed an unnatural act, a cultural override of our cognitive defaults, then its persistence is not guaranteed. It's a system that has to be consciously constructed and actively maintained, and that means the responsibility for its protection is an ongoing intellectual and institutional commitment.